Hello booktube, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Gunpowder.fiction.and.plot. I am on my own today. This is my March wrap. So, Nelle has decided she doesn't want to do wraps anymore, and I'm going to do them on my own. Okay, so the first book that I completed was a buddy read with Ange. I was going to call her Ange with an E. That's, of course, a defunct channel name. She's now Ange's Bookish Chatter. And this was the novel Prism by Simon R. Taylor, better known as one half of Booktube with Simon and Amy. He's, of course, Amy. No, he's Simon. This was a bizarre novel that I really enjoyed. It was a thriller with lots of turns. It was very funny. It was pure entertainment and indulgent. If you want something, just a bit of fun, a bit of escapism, I really enjoyed it. Now, I've got a reading vlog up, and it should have gone up. It should probably be the last video, where I discuss 12 books that I read this month. So I'm not going to discuss those books, I'm just going to mention what they were. So we'll skip through them. So I read Kylie Reid, Such a Fun Age, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Body by Olga Tokaraska, Sharks in the Time of Survivors by Kawai Strong Washburn, Luster by Raven Lalani, Saltwater by Jessica Andrews, The Mercies by Kira Millwood Hargrave, Mr. Loveman by Bernadine Evaristo, Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, Know My Name by Chanel Miller, The Long View by Elizabeth Jane Howard, The Nightingale by Kirsten Hanna, My Year of Meat by Ruth Olzecki. Every one of those books I have nice things to say about. I recommend all of those books. Some of them considerably more than others, but I recommend every one of those books. If you want to know my thoughts, go and have a look at the reading vlog. I finished The Wheel of Time this month, and there will be a video coming out about that. The last book was A Memory of Light, which concluded the series. These novels are fluff. These novels are adventure stories, essentially. And they're enjoyable and fun, and I like them. But I don't feel the need to discuss them in a lot of detail because they are epic fantasy novels that do what you expect them to do. This is just an epic fantasy novel. Now, Radiance of Tomorrow by Ishmael Beach. This was quite an interesting novel. It was Ishmael Beach is a writer from Sierra Leone, and this novel is set in Sierra Leone, and it is set after the Civil War, and the opening scene is like people walking into this town together to like live in peace, and people like talking about their past, and like, this man was responsible for cutting off people's hands, and this man was responsible for kidnapping children in order to create a militia, and now they're just going to live their normal lives like it didn't happen. And that was haunting. And then a mining company moves in and provides income for everybody, and the comparison with what the mining company is doing and what the Civil War is doing is quite eerie, and you can maybe roll your eyes and say, oh, Scott's on his ANCAP rant again, but I think that this one is very much worth a read for essentially to find out about the war crimes that this mining company committed, because they hired war criminals to work in their business. Like, it's just the dehumanization of corporate structure and the dehumanization of people in a military structure, and the similarities and what that results in with uncheckedness, and when these people are already monsters. This was great. I gave this book 4 stars. Very good. Definitely worthwhile picking up. The Mountains Sing by, and I'm just going to apologise, I'm going to butcher this name, by Nguyen Phan Q May. This, I was getting it early for the Invisible Cities readathon. I have basically just decided to read the novels for the countries when I feel like it. So sometimes that's going to be earlier, sometimes it's going to be later. I've essentially decided to swap Mexico and Vietnam. Pardon me. I have to say this was a disappointment. This really felt almost Ayn Randy-esque. It was just, oh my god, it was terrible. Not as bad as Atlas Shrugged. I shouldn't slate authors by comparing them to much worth pile of craps. But yeah, I really felt like this author didn't understand the politics of what was happening, and there was so many little things in this that I was questioning, is that true? At one point there was this family who were hungry and they were begging for money in order to feed their children, and they got money, and then the mother bought 2 cups of pho. And I'm like, that's not what you... hungry people buy rice or bread. That's... Hungry people buy the cheap stuff, and they buy lots of it. They don't buy soup with meat and veggies in it. That stuff, that's not efficient use of money. That's not what they do. And I felt like you just didn't get it. There was no empathy for the situation that causes people to be converted to some of the more crazier political beliefs. There is, any sort of authoritarian regime doesn't just appear without systems and structures, and people don't just jump into that. And so when you're critiquing communism, it felt very... it just wasn't... I didn't understand what people were doing and why they were doing it. The violence in this was accurate, and I guess maybe the feeling here... But the violence was just so unjustified in the novel that I didn't see where it came from. Now, maybe that was an attempt to make me empathise with what the characters would have been feeling, and maybe that was poor writing. I don't really know, but I generally tend to think it was poor writing. Then the constant dogmatic argument that business owners work harder than workers and are generally good made me want to vomit, because that's just not... some business owners work very hard. Business owners do work hard. That doesn't necessarily make them more worthy of food. That doesn't necessarily excuse shit things that they do, and definitely doesn't make them better people. It just is something that. People who work hard, that's great, but that doesn't necessarily make you moralistically better, and that sort of argument is enough to make me want to vomit. And I say that as a business owner who works hard. Business is the ultimate thing to test your ethics. If you want to find out whether you're a good person, open a business. You'll freaking find out exactly how ethical you are once it really does test you. and that's just not discussed here. None of that is discussed here. None of that, you know, it's just, it was so, I don't like I'm saying that the author didn't get it. I've never been to Vietnam. I didn't live in the Vietnamese War, the Vietnam War rather. I don't have that experience, but I can tell that the author has only been able to empathise with certain characters, and it just, I mean, maybe it's all down to a poor choice of narrator. Maybe that's all it is, but it didn't make the book good. And yeah. Next one, this was a buddy read with Sam from Paper Knot Books. We read Sam's favourite book, Space Opera by Catherynne M. Valente. And this was brilliant. This was so funny. This was clever. It was sarcastic. This was Douglas Adams but better. It's essentially what it was. If it was so Douglas Adams-esque, and it was better. This essentially, the premise of this story is that aliens have made first contact with Earth. They're not sure whether humans are a sentient creature or basically food. They know that they're either, any living creature is either a sentient creature or food. That is the analysis. And they're not sure whether humans are one or the other. And they're worried that they have like weapons and stuff, and they could be a problem. So they've decided to put them to a test. And if they fail the test, they get wiped out. And the test is essentially the Eurovision Song Contest with murder in space. And as good as that book sounds, rather, as bad as that book sounds, it's that good. It's very funny. Very much recommend it. This month was March of the Moderns hosted by Margaret Pinyard. I read one book towards it because I had other things that I was reading and I wasn't sure I was going to get there. But I definitely decided to take a chance and read some Evelyn Waugh, and I read Vile Bodies. I don't know what I think of this novel. I'm very confused by this novel. 3 stars is the ultimate rating, isn't it? This had such a lovely tone. I enjoyed Evelyn Waugh's writing style. But did I enjoy this book? Was it particularly funny? For a comedy, it didn't have quite enough jokes in it for me. Except Evelyn Waugh is not just a comedic writer. And that's really clear. And I just felt like literary comedy is not easy to pull off, and that's why I think a novel like The Confederacy of Dunces or Catch-22, that's why I think they're so good, because and I just felt like this wasn't quite there, and I'm so not sure what I think about Evelyn Waugh. Parts of me loved this novel and parts of me hated this novel, and I'm so up and down on it. I would love to know if you've read Evelyn Waugh, if you've read Vile Bodies, if you had that experience. The way this book ended was... I think it was actually a brilliant idea, but I'm just not sure the execution matched the brilliance. And I would love to know if you've read this book, if you like it. Maybe, this is only my second Waugh novel after Brideshead, and maybe I should have read a couple more books. Maybe I've read it in the wrong order. Maybe I haven't quite got used to his tone. I know Brideshead Revisited is a little bit different to the rest of Waugh's novels. but for me, I felt like he was trying to be Wodehouse and was not as good, and then he was also trying to write literary fiction, and Wodehouse dispenses with the literary fiction and just puts in jokes and it's entertaining. And you know, even though Wodehouse was clearly an excellent writer and probably could have written excellent literary fiction, but that wasn't what he was going to do. And I feel like Waugh is sort of like a jack of all trades, master of none. And it's frustrating because I feel like this could have been a very good novel and it wasn't. Well, I read a lot of comedy this month. Terry Pratchett, Reaper Man. This was a buddy read with booktube with Simon and Amy, with Simon from it. So I started the month by finishing off his novel, and then I did a buddy read with him. Now Simon's got a few things going on in his life, and he hasn't been able to finish this book. Death gets retired and gets a regular job tending a field, and people stop dying because death is not there. And then you have bizarre things like the civil rights for dead people and dead people are people too sort of thing going on, and it's a riot and it's very funny. It's my favourite Pratchett book that I've read so far. I think my favourite Discworld book. And I mean, Terry Pratchett he's got a system. He gets his nice simple storyline and then he makes it completely insane, and then he tries to write the story, and then halfway through it he's like, nah, I'm just gonna throw flying cows at this and talking trees and vampires. I'm gonna do whatever I can to sabotage my own book, and then because I'm essentially God, because I'm the writer and I can do whatever I want, I'm going to figure out how to make it work, and I'm going to do it all with a sense of humour. And I don't know why that works, because I suspect any other author doing that would end up with a red hot mess. And Pratchett ends up with a mess that works. Now the next one I read was Steppenwolf by Herman Hesse. Hesse is not for me, I don't think. This is the second one of his I've read after Siddhartha. This, again, Hesse, I really just think Hesse should have dispensed with writing novels altogether and just written essays. He just doesn't, he's not interested in writing a plot. He's not interested in what a plot adds to his novel. He's not too interested in what characters add to his novel, to be frank. He just wants to talk about this idea he has, and he goes on and on about it, and I think it just would have been more concise and better written if he had put in an essay. It would have been easier to follow, more understandable, and I don't understand. He wanted to write about this topic. Why did he put it in a novel? Some of the points he makes are brilliant. He's an astute observer of humanity and society and says some absolutely wonderful things, and it's definitely a worthwhile book to read, but I'm not sure why this is a novel and not an essay. I feel like if you're not interested in writing a plot, and if you're not interested in putting characters in your book, and you just want to discuss these ideas, are you writing literature at all? And I mean, maybe I completely missed the point, but I feel like this is an essay. On Black Sister Streets by Chika and Nguyen, this was the Read Under the Bed book club book for March. This is the story of 4 women working in Belgium as prostitutes. All these women come from Nigeria and were illegally transported to Nigeria, and it goes through their backstories and what happens to them in Belgium, and something bad happens to one of the women, and you know, you generally, I mean, something bad happens to all of the women at some point in this novel, to be fair, but I gave this book 4 stars. I liked this book. I didn't love this book. yeah, it was an interesting novel. The discussion of prostitution and people smuggling is always interesting. I felt like it didn't really go deep enough. The financial discrepancy between Nigeria and Belgium, Africa and Europe, the West and the rest of the world is sort of discussed in this. It was not discussed in this novel, but it's evident that this is one of the driving forces of problems in Nigerian society. And that is an interesting discussion of what's going on there. I thought that was very, very interesting. A Laodicean by Thomas Hardy. This was one of my least favourite Hardys, to be completely honest. It's a story of this lady who she lives in a castle and she wants to get the castle restored, so she hires a man to come and do the architecture, and that's not the family's architect, so he suggests a competition in order between him and the old architect, and they sort of end up in this battle for the work. In the meantime, this architect falls in love with the lady of the castle, and she has a very unhardy name of something so generic I've forgotten. Paula Powers, that was her name. The Powers and the D'Souza's are two families of the town that sort of a bit inbred and interact with each other, and it's a bit confusing. And the castle belonged to the D'Souza's, but in the current story it belongs to the Powers. And anyway, the current D'Souza heir or whatever meets Paula Powers and falls in love with her. Meanwhile, there's the villain of the piece who is running around causing all sorts of trouble for no reason that you can see, except it's pretty obvious what is going on. I don't know why it was really obvious, but the twist where it was revealed why he was doing all of his bad stuff was really obvious. I didn't find it a reveal, and I didn't find it answered my questions. We have our typical love story. We have our characters that are not perfect. We have, essentially in every Hardy novel, we have a woman who is not really sure of her pick. She has two suitors and she's not too fussed with either of them, and the men are completely smitten. And I always enjoy that little twist of the women are like, oh, you're alright, but the rest of their lives are, I don't know. But this book was really kind of lacking in the hearty misery that I've come to expect, and as a result, I just, if you it just felt very plain without the suffering, and yeah, I felt like Paula was so rich, and her lukewarmness towards these two men who, when they tried every trick to win her, and she was like, no, whatever. Like, I felt I did not feel her struggle to pick them. I did not feel any sort of pressure from her. And I think that's where it failed. I think if Paula had been poor and had two men fighting over her, that may have added something to it. If there had been a little bit more complication, if Paula had gotten pregnant, there was just an element missing to really make this a horrible novel. Yeah. So I gave that one 3 stars. Finished Under the Tripoli Sky by Karim Ben Hameda, which is my Libyan novel for the Invisible Cities. It was really a portrait of this young pubescent young adult male, and all the women in his life who he interacts with. And it was a lovely character portrait, but it wasn't a lot else. It was a short novella. It was nice. It was well written. Good prose, good characters, no plot to speak of, and it was fine. And when you've got a novella that's 100 pages, I think it really takes a lot for that to be a superb book. But it was good. It was good. I would definitely read something longer from him. So anyway, last book, Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. Okay, this is doing the rounds on booktube, and I want to tell you to go out and read this novel. It's fantastic. If you want to, as a straight man, I do not know much about trans people. I must confess that I am just curious as to how it all works, and knowing that, like, even just little things, like, I've always, like, how different are people within the trans community, and I know what top surgery and bottom surgery is, but I don't know how common they are. And this just, it educated me on so many little things, and things that I didn't realise that I wanted to know. And it was very good. It is a debut novel from Torrey Peters, and if they get any better, they're going to be... I think Torrey Peters uses the pronoun she, but I'm not 100%. Yeah, it was a debut novel, and it was a little bit rusty in places, but it was so brilliant in other places that you just, like... What is the sexuality of a trans person? How does that even work when, like... And that was not... It was... So many things in this novel made me think about stuff, and it was great. I think most people will know the story of this. If you don't know the story of this, we have Ames. Ames was born James. Ames transitioned to Amy, and then detransitioned to Ames. Ames identifies as trans, but no longer does the trans thing. Ames is the complete picture in gender fuckery, and that is interesting. Ames is in a relationship with Katrina. Katrina is finds out that she is pregnant. Ames is quite surprised at this because Ames assumes that he is infertile from his drugs that he took to transition to a woman. He has to make a decision about what sort of father he wants to be. Katrina has to make a decision about whether she's going to keep the baby. And we have this sort of quite typical dynamic of a couple is having a baby before they're quite ready for it, and the father doesn't really know what they want to do, and the mother sort of doesn't know what she wants to do, and then Ames is respectful of Katrina's body, and like, well, it's your decision, Katrina. I will go along, I will support you if you want, but I will not stand in your way if you don't want to. And then Katrina's like, no, but I need to know what's going on. And anyway, Ames calls up Reese. Reese is Ames's ex when Ames was Amy. Reese is a trans woman. And asks Reese whether Reese will consider being a parent to this kid, and then floats the idea to Katrina that we will have this, or they will have this queer parenting experience, and where they have 3 parents. And then we go back in time and we talk about the relationship between Reese and Amy. We go back into the future and into the present, and we talk about this character Stanley, who is one of Reese's ex, and so there's another timeline in there, and we have all these different combinations of sexuality and people, and it allows Peters to have this discussion of the trans identity in like this no holes barred thing. Like it was so good. One of the highlights for me was they were talking at one point about trans women breastfeeding children, and how that can happen, and there's a hormone out there that you can take that stimulates lactation, and they discuss this, and the whole time they're discussing this, I'm like, oh, that means that I could have this hormone, and I could breastfeed a kid. And I was like, oh, like, would I want to do that? What's that even mean? Would I grow breasts? What's going on? Like, I just, and then they said after it happens, straight men are endlessly fascinated when trans women lactate, and perhaps it gets into some deep primal knowledge that they know that if a trans woman can do it. I just that like, I'm like, oh, you just called me out there, and I was wondering myself, because that's some trippy stuff. This book was so good. Like the level of empathy that a trans person must possess because of the way that they are forced to live means that trans writers can't help but to understand their characters in a way that is just superb. And I really recommend this book. This book might end up being excellent because it is the first book of this type, but it is still an excellent novel. Like it in the absence of trans literature available to mainstream readers, this novel is brilliant. And I don't have any other novels to compare this to. So if in a couple of years' time there's and I hope there is, a huge selection of trans literature, it may not be as brilliant if you're picking this up as the 7th novel. But for me, and my knowledge of trans people and my knowledge of how trans people live and all the trans issues, I just learnt so much, and it was just, I just can't recommend this book enough as that sort of experience. And just, storyline and all of that was fine. I personally was not a fan of the ending of this novel, but when you're talking about literary fiction and endings, there's not many that are good. They do tend to generically be a bit of a disaster. That's all the books that I read for March. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think, or if you're intending to pick up any of these books, why you want to pick them up, what has captured your interest. All right, bye.